All right. Let me start with the first item here is the capital outlay, and perhaps Department of Finance would like to provide us with some information on what the May revision here is.
Thank you. Thank you, Assemblymember Gordon. Thank you, Assemblymember Department of Finance. The May revised proposal makes an adjustment to the governor's proposal. The original governor's budget proposed $179 million for capital outlay for high-speed rail for their design and environmental review. And the May revise adjusts that by a negative $46 million to bring their total 2011-12 need to $133 million. This reflects savings due to current year carryover.
Okay. LAO comments?
Thank you, Chair. Eric Thronson with the Legislative Analyst's Office. In our recent report, we recommend the legislature take a hard look at this project, and that would require pausing some of the work and requiring the High-Speed Rail Authority to do a number of things, including reevaluate where they may start the project based on criteria that the legislature defines. To pause the work and reconsider where to start or from where to begin, we believe that the current plan, the way the money is currently planned to be spent, may need to be reconsidered, and therefore we recommend that the legislature reject the administration's budget of $133 million now for the consultants performing the project management work, and just appropriate the funding necessary to allow the High-Speed Rail Authority to do the reevaluation necessary to consider what would be best for the state and where best to start the project.
Okay. I'm going to go to the authority in just a second. I want two comments. One, in terms of the staff recommendation would be that we go ahead and approve this, but provide some language that clarifies that the authority could not use funds at the moment to purchase right-of-way or sign design-build contracts, and particularly in the Central Valley, and prior to legislative review of the reports that are due in October, which includes the business plan. So that's the staff recommendation. Let me comment that immediately following, shortly after the release of the LAO report, I had an opportunity to meet with representatives of the Federal Railway Administration who were here in Sacramento, and I became convinced that, through that meeting that we do need to proceed, and that if we are to take advantage of the federal funds that are available, which the ARA funds expire in 2017, and in order to avail ourselves of those funds, we need to keep moving while we continue, I think, to examine the project, but certainly to move on planning and design work to keep us on target, I think, makes some sense. There was also a fairly convincing argument made by the federal highway folks or federal railway folks who are here regarding the need to do this work in the Central Valley as a starting point. So I think that from my perspective, at least, based on those conversations, that continuing to move forward with planning and design for Central Valley, given the timeline of the federal money, would make some sense. And Mr. Van Ark may want to comment on that.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Roelof Van Ark, CEO, High Speed Rail. And with me today, my new Chief Deputy Director, Chris Ryan. So we now have 20 people at the authority. I'm glad to report. 20 and a half. So yes, I would like to report back to you on the issue. As as we all know, when the LAO's report came out, we had the advantage of having the DOT and FRA here basically 2 days after that. It was not planned that way, but it was just their review of the project that had been planned on the 16th and 17th. During that time, they were very clear verbally that they were not able to renegotiate the conditions of the funding agreements. Secondly, they remained of the opinion that the decision to lay the initial track in the Central Valley was the right decision and was made for good reasons, and that they wanted us to continue in the way that we had planned this project. They also, at that stage, were very clear in their minds, you know, that the last round of ARA applications for the $2 billion from Florida was oversubscribed to the value of $10 billion. And if California did not want to make use of the funds that are available, that we should please make them aware of this, because they could reallocate it to other states quite quickly. What has happened since then, just basically this morning, hot off the press, I received a letter from the FRA, DOT in fact, which confirms exactly the same. That means they are very clear in their minds that they cannot, by law, renegotiate the conditions of our funding agreements. And secondly, they also reconfirm that they would like the work to start in the Central Valley, because logically for a high-speed rail system, that is the place to start a development and not on the bookends of the system. So the letter I received this morning, I can let you have copies of it, which basically confirms what you had also been told verbally during your meeting. On the staff recommendation, if I may, Mr. Chairman, we understand the request of the staff here, and we are not totally in disagreement with it. You obviously are most interested in the business plan and the funding plan, which we'd agreed, and it's been recorded will be supplied by the 14th of October. And you need time to study those to make the decisions for the future. On the other hand, the request by staff is that we do not purchase right of way or go into any design build contracts before the next review, if I understand it, before the next year's budget round. I just fear that for the purchase of right of way, that is a little late, and I would just, with respect, request that we discuss that particular issue. We intend, according to plan, to go into right of way acquisition around the time of the rod and nod, which is at this stage planned around about February of 2012, so a little earlier. In other words, well after the time you receive the business plan and the funding plan, but not in the next year. In fact, our money is already in a budget from the previous years of $243 million for right-of-way acquisition. And, you know, so we could go into negotiation, and I just request that we consider that as we move forward.
All right, we'll have some discussion about that in a moment. I want to take, I have a couple other items I want to raise on this before we try to take the whole item. But I do want to invite our colleague, Assemblyman Perea, who I understand would like to make a comment. I'd like to allow him to do that. We'll then continue this discussion, and then I'll open it up for public comment. You're welcome to sit, Henry.
All
Please.
right. Well, do I get a vote too?
I can't do that for you, but I can let you sit at the dais. I can let you, use a microphone. I can't give you a vote.
You got it. You got it. Well, colleagues, thank you for giving me an opportunity just to say a few quick words. I know you're going to get into the meat and potatoes of this issue with the High-Speed Rail Authority, but what I wanted to do today was just drop off this letter to you, Mr. Chairman, and to members of the committee, expressing my concern with some of the staff recommendations that Mr. Van Ark just spoke about. My concern representing the Central Valley is that we know because of the first phase being built in Fresno and through the valley, that thousands of jobs are going to get created because of this in an area that desperately needs them. And my concern is that any recommendation that comes forth that would delay, slow down those jobs is really concerning for me. And so I wanted to ensure that as we move forward, that we don't start setting barriers within this budget that prohibits the High-Speed Rail Authority from doing their job, from moving forward, from buying the necessary rights of way and doing the things that they need to do in order to, number one, make high-speed rail successful, but number two, create the badly needed jobs that we must have in the Central Valley. So I wanted to speak to that, and then just the second issue, and that is of the outreach efforts. I think part of the proposal is to cut in half the outreach efforts, and I think that would be a huge mistake, especially when you have a project this large. We really need to reach out to all stakeholders as much as possible and as often as possible, because there are a lot of concerns that have been raised from various stakeholders throughout this process, and we want to make sure that we are in constant communication with them so we can deal with those concerns sooner rather than later. I think slowing down outreach efforts slows down the project, and it makes it much more complicated down the road. And so, Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to say a few words. I'll be watching this closely. I hope that the committee would reconsider the staff recommendation and just support the governor's recommendation in the May revise. So I'll leave these maybe with the sergeant, and we'll have the sergeant distribute these letters to the committee.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Pratt.
Thank you.
I'd like to take just a moment of kind of more personal privilege and have a brief discussion and comment about the corridor that's in my district, the peninsula from San Jose to San Francisco. And recently, Senator... did you get this? I'm sorry. Recently, Senator Simidian and I, along with Congresswoman Anna Eshoo, made a proposal regarding how initial work could start in that corridor. And it was a proposal made because we felt it would actually advance and speed up this project in the state of California and lead to job creation sooner if we could find a way to meet some of the local community needs. And so we proposed in that corridor that work be essentially, that any planning, designing be done based on the existing right-of-way, that understanding that work would need to, the tracks would be laid substantially within that right-of-way. And secondly, that there'd be no planning for an aerial or a viaduct, except in those locations where a community really wanted it. But in most of the peninsula, a viaduct means that there's going to be trains peering down into people's homes, backyards, and businesses, and it's really not something most people want. There are some areas where I think they do want that, and that finally that the EIR work be done based on this kind of smaller scale approach. I would like to suggest that we also consider, and I'll propose this in a minute, some language that would clarify that we'd like the authority to respond to that proposal and to only use funds at the moment based on that kind of proposal. And then finally, to further enhance that work in that corridor, there has previously been, there's an MOU in existence with Caltrain for their involvement in some of the assisting with planning. Funding is not in the this year's budget for that MOU, and I'd like to have us also consider allocating, I think it's $1.1 million to continue that contract. So, so we have the staff recommendation. I've got a couple other items I'd like us to discuss, and I'd like to first, I think, open this up for public comment, and then we'll have a discussion here at the DS. So, is there any public comment on this item? You can come up and stand at the end there. Sure. And you need to push the button to turn the microphone on. Thank you.
Sure. Emily Rush, I'm the State Director of CalPIRG, the California Public Interest Research Group. We've been outspoken supporters for the project. Overall, as our California population grows, we're going to need more transportation options. We think this is a great option to build for the future of our state. And I just wanted to note for the record that we're supportive of the governor's May revision. I think it's particularly important that we fund the ongoing engineering that we need to do to make sure that we start construction in the Central Valley next year. My concern would be that any delay in the engineering or the construction would actually increase the cost of this project down the road. And I think all of us are very concerned about making sure that we build this project with as little funds as possible. And so I urge you to support the revision.
Thank you. Next.
Mr. Chair and members, Mark Smith on behalf of the American Council of Engineering Companies of California. We also support the governor's proposed budget. Urge you to take into consideration the fact that you can chew gum and walk at the same time here. It is possible to fund the authority, to not jeopardize those federal dollars, which we have talked about. I think that it's been discussed that the feds are a little inflexible. I think they've also demonstrated their willingness to remove those dollars from other areas of the country and redistribute them rather quickly. I would hate to see that happen here in California. So we think that you can fund the authority and you can continue the oversight and scrutiny of the authority's process at the same time. So we support the governor's revision and ask you to do the same. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Jolinda Thompson, Association for California High-Speed Trains. We support the governor's budget and the chairman's initial remarks. From the perspective of the people in the trenches actually working on the project, the biggest problems, the calls that I get are concern about delay, so they can't meet the parameters. They're in a box as well in terms of meeting the federal deadlines, in terms of getting their work done. And so they're very anxiously watching your process here to make sure whatever you decide to do, they're able to complete the work and meet the deadlines and get those federal dollars. So thank you so much for those comments.
Thank you. Yes?
Mr. Chairman and members, thank you. My name is Daniel Kraus with Californians for High-Speed Rail. We represent the grassroots pro-high-speed rail folks in California. I just want to urge you to support the governor's May revision. And also, we're very concerned about some of the things that have been happening up here in terms of, are we indicating to the federal government they're not serious? We need to move forward with the Central Valley as planned. That makes a lot of sense for many reasons. You have to build a high-speed track test system, all those kind of things. It makes a lot of sense. The urban areas still need time to work out all the complexities. There's a lot more complexities in urban areas, so give that process more time, but don't delay the project. Otherwise, we have a new competitor, which is called the Northeast Corridor. They're now in the high-speed rail game nationally, and I'm sure there's a lot of Congress people that would want to see that money come there if we kind of futz around here in California. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Chairman Gordon and committee members, Mark Kyle, Operating Engineers, Local Union Number 3. I want to just reinforce your comments earlier, Mr. Gordon, about your conversations with the FRA and your two major takeaway impressions. One, that we shouldn't delay the project. We should move forward as it's currently scheduled. And secondly, that we should, in fact, start in the Central Valley. I also want to incorporate by reference everything that your colleague, Assembly Member Perea, said in terms of the Central Valley being ready, willing, and able. We have members throughout the Central Valley. Some of our members, construction workers in the Bay Area, both East and West Bay, are starting to see the economic recovery. Unfortunately, that's not true in the Central Valley, where we have unemployment approaching 30%. Our members stand ready to work on this, and we'd like to see it move forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Hi, I'm Paul Herman. I'm a student at Fresno City College, and I'm also part of Californians for High-Speed Rail. I just want to thank the committee for taking the time today and doing these issues and the revisions that the governor put forward. There is a threat to the federal dollars that if we lose now, we might never get back, or we'll lose this momentum that we have currently. I support the authority and their decision to start in the Central Valley. I believe it's the right decision, and I want to thank you guys for your time today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And our final
Morning, Stacy Mortensen with the San Joaquin Rail Commission. We're an MOU partner with the High Speed Rail Authority for both the Altamont Corridor and Merced de Sac. Those are both Phase 2 corridors. We've been strongly in support of the Phase 1 priority, strongly in support of the Authority and FRA's recommendation for the initial operating segment. However, we do think the Phase 2 system planning effort needs to go forward. We know the Authority believes that. They have submitted requests for both the Altamont Corridor and Merced to Sacramento in the state budget, but obviously the difficult financial situation has knocked those out. We're here and we have been trying to put $3 million of local money into the process. And the legislature keeps asking, where are the locals and where's their money? And we're trying our darndest, but we can't seem to get it past the Department of Finance. We will fully fund the Altamont effort to keep it going. We think it gets twice as expensive if you shut it down. We think that you lose public credibility, which you've asked us to try to cultivate over this last 18 months if we shut it down. And so we're really asking where the locals can come and fund the effort. Could you please support keeping that work going? Keeps people employed and keeps credibility with the public, and we would ask you to consider that and help us out. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. That will conclude the public comment and bring it back up here for comments or discussion. Mr. Hoffman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the witnesses. I think all of us who support high-speed rail in concept want to see things keep moving. Certainly we want to make sure we're in position to use those federal dollars, and we're all drawn to the promise of jobs and a program that actually gets built. But I share your concerns about the route selection and the difficulties on the peninsula in particular. And I was going to ask you, Mr. Chair, in addition to the elevated areas, I've heard that the other option of tunneling could be extremely expensive and problematic as well. And so I would hope that as you seek a response from the authority on that issue, that it include not just the complications of elevating, but also tunneling and the tunneling costs relative to the peninsula versus the Pacheco alternative. I also wanted to ask you, Mr. Chair, is your concept that there would be on the peninsula Caltrain and high-speed rail next to each other on the same right-of-way, or would there be some kind of a merger between the two and have Caltrain cover that leg of the system?
No, the concept we've proposed and talked about is having both high-speed rail and Caltrain in the right-of-way along that corridor.
And it can accommodate that?
I certainly believe so, Mr. Van Ark.
Substantially within the right-of-way. I think that's the word that is very important. And when we had further discussions with Chairman Gordon and Senator Smithian, we came to that conclusion. I mean, we will be substantially within the right-of-way. And that means at times you've got to take a bit off the left of the side of the right-of-way. But the intent is to be substantially within the right-of-way. And that is possible.
Thank you for that. A question, I guess, for Mr. Van Ark. I'm less concerned about tying your hands on acquisitions and contracts if it's limited to a segment of the system that does not in any way predispose you to Pacheco versus Altamont, because I continue to believe that Altamont is the better selection and the one that ultimately a successful program is going to have to move toward. So I guess I want to ask you as specifically as I can and ask for as specific an answer as I can. Is there anything in the funding request that we're being asked to approve that would invest in a Pacheco route and in any way commit the process to that route?
I think if I may split your question into two, anything that would be built, in other words, what we plan to build in the Central Valley, would not affect that decision at all.
But would you be seeking any property acquisitions on the Pacheco route?
No.
So signing any design-build contracts on the Pacheco route?
No. So that would not happen. So there would be no design-build or right-of-way acquisition. It would only be in the core of the Central Valley, which would apply to all the alternatives, both the alternatives you spoke about. Obviously, within the budget that we are requesting, there is further work that would be done, engineering work and environmental clearance work, on the Pacheco Pass alignment, but no right-of-way acquisition. and no design-build contracts.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Valdale?
I guess I'm a little interested in the fact that everybody wants to start in the Central Valley, but when I talk to my locals, they feel like they've had absolutely no voice in this. You had an open house there a week ago, no open mic, no opportunity for anybody to voice their opinion on it. And then I come back up here in Central Valley, Central Valley, Central Valley, and why isn't anybody talking to locals? Why isn't there an opportunity for the locals to have an opinion or a voice on what's going? Obviously, it's going through their property. Just my county alone, we're looking at 11,400 acres of property basically demolished for a test track, which I'm not a big fan of. I mean, if it's a test, let's test somewhere where we don't actually produce anything. But agriculture there in our area is our biggest business. That's what we do. That's what puts people to work. And if we have water, our unemployment numbers actually improve, which they will this year. Luckily, rain provided that water for us. So I'm curious why so much Central Valley talk up here, but not enough in the district.
I think, at least in the time I've been around, I've been to the Central Valley many times. I've been to many meetings, hearings, and public possibilities where many people have spoken.
I've had a few people actually kicked out of meetings in the last few weeks that were not allowed in when those meetings were closed door with some of the local staff. When I've met with my planning commission at the county, all they were given was a map. I asked them questions about what the rail was going to look like, and they couldn't answer a single question for me. So
I would be most willing to discuss it with you. Obviously, that's not the intent. There clearly are design meetings, and there clearly are public meetings. But the public meetings, I've been to many public meetings myself, and I know my staff has them too, and public is given a great opportunity to talk. But the process has been going on for nearly 12 years, I guess, but the more serious process has been going on for 2 or 3 years with many, I would say, hundreds of meetings that have taken place. And the alignment and the way they align with the whole environmental process is being conducted to meet the requirements of CEQA at the end of the day and NEPA. It is being monitored by people like the FRA, but also the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers. It's not purely a high-speed rail process. It's a process that everybody else is involved in as well. And the process and the selection of the Central Valley was based, again, on many discussions and meetings, whereby I think you do know that finally, with a strong recommendation, in fact, more than a recommendation from the FRA, that the best place to start was the Central Valley, being one of, or two, in fact, 2 of 4 ARA pre-qualified sections.
And I really do believe that the decision to place the Central Valley on first, as the LAO mentioned in the report, was political reasons to help elect a local congressman. But I'd really like to ask the LAO what their reasons are for pushing the high-speed rail out of the valley.
Thank you. Just to be clear, our report isn't suggesting or isn't recommending that we don't start in the Central Valley. What our report is recommending is that we step back and think about it from what is in the state's best interest and not necessarily what is in the project's best interest. The High-Speed Rail Authority Board's job, their task, is to consider what best can move this project forward, regardless of what may or may not be the best for the state. And I think it all comes down to a question of whether we're going to get the funding necessary to make this Central Valley segment valuable to the state. Just to take a step back on about your meeting with the FRA, Mr. Chair, of course the FRA is going to say what they're going to say. They have reasons for choosing the Central Valley, various reasons, but those reasons may or may not include what is best for the state. Unless that letter that I haven't seen that Mr. Van Ark has brought includes funding commitments, we're very likely to complete a project with very little benefit to the state. If we build in the Central Valley and get no more funding, we're going to have 123 miles of track through the Central Valley, which will ultimately lead to jobs in the short term, but at the end we'll improve a San Joaquin Corridor intercity rail line that runs 6 trains a day. And that will be all we'll have. So we're not against starting in the Central Valley. There are good reasons for starting in the Central Valley. We think that the legislature needs to consider what is best for the state, and we think that by selecting criteria and asking the High-Speed Rail Authority to go back and define where to start based on the criteria that the legislature chooses is a good way to try to resolve this concern.
If I may, the high-speed rail states that they can't do either of your suggestions on what he spoke about earlier. What do you think that does to the probability of the success? I mean, obviously, holding back on the money, asking the federal government to step back and delay the dates that the money has to be spent by. How do you think that affects the probability of success on the rail now?
Well, with all due respect to Mr. Van Ark, we don't believe that a 3-month delay is going to jeopardize our ability to complete the project or to spend the FRA, the ARA money, the money from the federal government, by the deadlines. If the federal government gave us the flexibility to spend the federal funds before we spend our matching bond funds, we think this is a very reasonable request. There are a number of recipients of ARA funds who didn't offer any match, and they're spending federal funds right now with no match. It seems reasonable for them to allow California to do the same, and in fact it seems unreasonable for them to punish us for offering a match by making us spend bond dollars as we spend federal dollars. It seems like a very reasonable request, but of course the FRA isn't going to want to change their regulations unless we say we're serious about this. And to go back to whether the federal government was willing to take the money away from the California project and send it somewhere else, sure, there were $10 billion worth of projects, applications for that $2 billion most recently allowed. But those were for planning projects and for upgrading intermediate speed rail. They were not for high-speed rail projects the way California is envisioning our project. And in fact, there is nowhere in the country that is building a project like ours. And this is the type of project that President Obama said he is interested in building. It seems very reasonable that the FRA, when asked whether they wanted to spend money on improving minor improvements to rail systems all over the country, or whether they want to spend the money in a way that benefits both real high-speed rail in California and the state's mobility and environmental outcomes, we think that if the legislature really pressed the FRA on that, we would get the response that we need in order to move forward and successfully complete this project.
And then to the expertise on the project itself, you mentioned in your report that Caltrans would be a better suited manager for the program. Can you explain that a little bit, why?
Certainly. And as far as expertise on constructing high-speed rail projects, we believe, and I think this is a nuance in the report that has been lost, unfortunately. I don't think, in our report, we're not recommending that high-speed rail design and do the engineering work that Caltrans do the engineering work for the high-speed rail project. We recognize that there is need for contractors with this specialized expertise to do this kind of work. However, there is a lot of effort that needs to be done outside of this specialized work that Caltrans has decades of expertise and experience with, like, for example, right-of-way acquisition and developing public support for projects. Developing public support for highway projects they've been doing for years. Highways have gone through neighborhoods that were very difficult to get through, but Caltrans has developed the relationships with the local entities necessary to get this kind of work done that High-Speed Rail Authority does not have. And in fact, their contractors are having trouble developing. There are a variety of reasons why moving the project into Caltrans as a separate division with the same project delivery tools that they have today, but while still using some of Caltrans' expertise, makes a lot of sense at this stage of the project.
And then in one of your, on the report, there's a comment here. The Bureau of Labor Statistics actually states that 97% of all operators of track laying equipment that the high-speed rail indicates it would use for the project reside in other states. So, I mean, that's a pretty large percentage of the people. I mean, when we're talking about jobs for our area, 97% of people that would be laying the track aren't from California. That's an interesting comment there.
Well, if I may, that's just an example of some of the work that would be done. Certainly, a number of Californians will be employed. There's earth moving work. There's you know, the overpasses and grade separations that'll need to be developed. All those things that are very similar to what we Californians can do today for highway projects will need to be done. That's an example of work that Californians don't have expertise in. It's technically, and Mr. Van Ark can probably describe it better than I can. There are today machines that just basically drive along a railroad track and lay track in front of itself. And it's an efficient way to do so, to build railroad tracks. And these types of workers aren't necessarily in California, but there would be a number of jobs that would still come for Californians, of course.
And one last question on the comparisons for the cost here in this book. What the 2009 estimate for the cost of laying the track, the Fresno-Bakersfield segment, it's gone up 57%. And I think in our sub-hearing that we had last week, Caltrans had an average increase of cost of what, 30-some%, 38% I think it was on a $4.5 million project. They were over usually about $1.5 million. I mean, 57% is a huge jump in cost, and I just don't see why we're rushing through this thing. I don't want to see it go through my district. I know my constituents, that's our number one concern, down to our local sheriffs, our local board of soups. Everybody that knocks on my door is always saying the same thing: get this away from our county. They're scared, obviously, for the cost as a taxpayer. Then the guys that own the 11,000 acres, it's a list of probably 30 or 40 people, but the majority of the voices are people that are worried about the long-term cost of this project, and it's really just really concerned with this whole project in general and the way it's being run. And we talk about the expertise of the project. I look at the board that sits there and decides what's going to be done, and I don't really see anybody there that has any expertise in building anything of this nature. I don't even see Caltrans having the ability to build this because they've never built. What was the largest project Caltrans ever built? $1 billion? I mean.
Well, yeah, it depends on how you look at it. I guess the Bay Bridge is probably the largest project, and it's roughly $8.5 billion, I think now. Caltrans could answer that better.
And then we basically put this thing in high gear, and we're told to rush through. And then on top of that, through my district, where all my constituents are really up in arms, and the next available opportunity we have is in a few weeks for open mic. And they feel like they're being run over with this project, and they're not happy with it at all. And so I'd really ask that you guys do spend some time in the district, listen to some of them, don't throw them out at the meetings, and give them the opportunity to share their opinions on what's going on there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Valdeo. Now, let me just say, having constituents who are vocal, as I do, I understand the issues and challenges, and Mr. Van Ark, I would, if you have not met with Mr. Valdeo, I would encourage you to do so as soon as possible.
We have, but I would still like to meet with you, especially I don't like hearing that people get thrown out of meetings. I would like to clarify the situation, obviously. But if I may, Mr. Chairman, just on the issue of the Central Valley, I mean, I was hired as a high-speed rail expert to come and run this project, and I must just reconfirm to Member Valadeo and others that the decision to build this backbone, not the test track, it's not a test track, it's the track where the trains will be tested, but it is the track. It's the backbone of the high-speed rail system that will connect Northern California to Southern California. It is a system that is necessary if you believe in high-speed rail. If you do not believe in high-speed rail, but you want to build a commuter rail system between LA and Anaheim, then you could put the money in that LA-Anaheim system. But that is not a high-speed rail system. That is a 90 miles an hour commuter rail infrastructure which will accommodate high-speed rail trains one day to get people to Anaheim. But you cannot do any testing of a high-speed rail train on there. And it is not the back, it is a very expensive infrastructure that you have to build there because of the cities. So therefore, without that backbone, without putting a backbone, without connecting Northern California and Southern California, that what the people want, what the people have voted for in Prop 1A will never come about. And never did anybody at the time when Prop 1A was voted for, or in the business case that today exists for the High-Speed Rail Authority, never did anybody ever say there would be $35 billion or $45 billion in the bank by the time you start construction. So that would have been a totally unrealistic thing for anybody to have accepted at the time, and is still unrealistic today. But if you believe in high-speed rail, this is the way high-speed rail is built everywhere in the world. High-speed rail between Paris and Lyon was built outside of Paris and outside of Lyon. The central section is the section that you build, which is the high-speed section. You go into the cities in what we refer to as phased implementation, and as Chairman Gordon has previously mentioned, they're looking for something similar to that, which is what they call a blended system. But there's similarities, and we are finding the way forward, how we can define what blended system is and what phased implementation is. That is the normal way of building high-speed rail systems.
All right, thank you. I'm going to bring this discussion to a close in just a second, but we'll give Mr. Valde one last question.
All right, just one question then, I guess. What percentage of, how much money have you already had locked up from the federal government? And this is a long question because it's only one. But what percentage of that, what money have you picked up, locked up? How much more do you need, and where do you expect to get the rest of that money as far as from the federal or private investors?
So we have got at this stage have received, the state of California has received $3.9 billion from the federal government, of which $400 million will be used for the Trans-Bay Terminal, but it is also high-speed rail, Prop 1A, high-speed rail monies, arrow money. In total, we now have $6.3 billion for high-speed rail, to build high-speed rail. We've got $6.3 billion in total. That's with the Prop 1A match, bond matches. What do we need? Well, we have, you know that the estimated value of the project is $45 billion.
That's for phase one.
Phase one. So it has always been that magnitude. And the issue is, if you now take the 3.9 billion, we need roughly 18 billion from the feds.
What about the private side? How much of that money has actually come from private investors?
Around about 10 billion has been estimated from the private sector.
Estimated or actually accounted?
In the business case. You can only
have you been able to document that?
You can only attract private sector investments in systems of this nature, of this type, when you can prove to the private sector that the federal and state government is serious about building the system. I have the people coming to my office, and I'm quite happy to share them with you,
I'm pretty sure that no one will invest without a good financial plan that shows they'll actually return a profit.
Sure, but the background of high-speed rail in the world, every real high-speed rail system in the world is cash positive. Every high-speed rail system in the world is cash positive.
I've heard that only one is, and that's because their government actually wrote down their debt to zero.
Every one is cash positive.
This is the first I've ever heard that one.
Does that mean that they pay off the infrastructure cost? No. It's the same as if you get a trucking company and you tell the trucking company to build the interstate highway system for you. So the infrastructure generally is built by the state, and the operator with that magnitude of $10 billion is the investor in things like rolling stock stations, depots. That is the model that works around the world. 2 systems in the world have paid back completely. 2 lines in the world have paid back infrastructure, plus the private investors portion. They make profit on private investor. But then you must take into account also the secondary benefits that you get out of not having accidents, environmental improvements, etc., to pay back the infrastructure investment. I can give you a document from the UIC, which will reconfirm what I've said, and UIC is the International Rail Federation.
Can you get me a document that shows that Amtrak has paid back the money it's been invested in through California?
No, but I can give you a document that says that even the Acela system is cash positive and generates more money than what the operating costs are. They generate a lot more cash than the operating costs on the Acela system, which in itself we all know is a compromised high-speed rail system.
And I would expect that part of this will be a much broader discussion we'll have with you after mid-October when we see the business plan, and we can get further into some of these issues. For today, we need to take some action relative to the capital outlay expenditures, and based on the conversation, I'd like to suggest a three-part motion. One, that we approve the funding that's in Schedule 1, the revision as presented by the Department of Finance on behalf of the Governor, that we, as part of that, adopt the provisional language that staff has provided around some limits on right-of-way purchase or design build, but do that by directing staff to work with the administration to make sure that whatever we do minimizes project delay. And then secondly, that we adopt some language that would limit the design of the segment between San Francisco and San Jose based upon the authority being able to work substantially within the right-of-way that exists there now. And finally, that in order to facilitate that section, we continue to provide $1.1 million for an agreement with Caltrain. I would suggest those three elements of a motion. A comment from Finance?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Matt Robinson with Department of Finance. We're opposed to the idea of the additional $1.1 million for the Caltrain MOU. It's our understanding that the work on the PRP, which is the Caltrain High-Speed Rail Peninsula Rail Program, is funded 50-50, and that's pursuant to what the MOU states. So we're unclear if this is $1.1 million that's going to be directed to Caltrain, in which case that could set some precedent for other local agencies to come forward for state funding to fund rail plans in their areas. Furthermore, we understand that this work is largely performed by the regional consultants, and therefore is already funded in the capital outlay side of things for those for the planning work on the peninsula.
Mr. Van Ark, do you have any comment on that?
Mr. Chairman, the authority did form a joint working group, this PRP group on the peninsula with Caltrain. The $1.1 million that is referred to would be 50% of the total cost of running this particular office. I mean, just as a matter of clarification, because it only came up in this meeting now. But the $1.1 million would be 50% of the cost of running that office. Clearly, it is, a question of what can one do within the regional consultants' work, and what do we need to do together with Caltrain. The investigation that you are aware of doing a capacity planning on the peninsula at the moment to see what we can do in our phased or blended implementation is work that's needed to be done by Caltrain, as an example. So there are some shared costs that we do have with Caltrain, which would normally run through this joint office and joint agreement that we do have.
Okay. All right. So that's a suggestion on an approach. Comments on that?
I'm a little confused, Mr. Chair, about the difference between what you're proposing. And my understanding, the third part of your motion was to limit the segment between San Jose and San Francisco to be substantially within the Caltrain right-of-way. But I'm sort of hearing the administration express concern that somehow means we're taking high-speed rail money and handing it to Caltrain, which I think would be problematic.
No, those are unrelated. That's not the same issue, really. I mean, it's the same peninsula, but it's a different issue.
Yeah, no, it'd be for the planning purposes that sort of some work high-speed rail needs to get done, as I understand it.
Right. I think the concept is fine, especially if we're using Mr. Van Ark's language of substantially within the right-of-way, because I don't think I want to preclude the train from going into the Transbay Terminal. I think we want it to make it all the way.
That's a good example.
All the way home.
Yep.
So I would support you as long as maybe I need to ask the administration to clarify your concern about funding precedent.
Well, our concern is that if this work is indeed, the work with Caltrain is basically to plan the alternative through the peninsula. And that work is covered essentially in capital outlay, which we provide $28 million for planning and design work through the peninsula. Our other concern is that if we're funding an agreement with Caltrain, that in the future, we may have other local transportation authorities step forward looking for state funding to fund this type of work, which there really isn't available funding out there to be doing this, especially with bond funds. So those are our concerns.
Mr. Chair, I'm hearing you propose basically a planning directive.
Yes.
Which I am comfortable with.
Okay.
As long as we're
That's really where
yeah.
I want to go with this.
Yeah.
So what we would need to do here is, I guess, I propose something. I don't have all the specific language, but we can, I think, if we give direction, we can have staff finalize that language, if that's acceptable, working with both sides. And if that's acceptable, so what I'm suggesting is I'll be looking for a motion to provide the funding for the capital outlay and to provide language that restricts some ability on right-of-way purchase and design build, but allowing staff to work with the administration to assure that we minimize the impact on any project delay in doing that, and that we ask them to work in terms of design and plan in the San Jose-San Francisco corridor to work with essentially within the right-of-way, existing right-of-way, and that we ask them to find funding to support continued work with Caltrain on the planning side. If that's acceptable, I need a motion in that regard. And I have a second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Gordon?
Aye.
Ms. Butler? Aye. Mr. Huffman? Aye. Mr. Jones? Mr. Aladale?
No. Okay, that motion passes. Issue number 2 on high-speed rail is the financial plan and public private participation program. We held this open when we first heard this in January, and there is we're looking forward to a report in mid-October, and if I guess what we need to understand is whether that report will include a new ridership study as part of that report.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. I would have had to otherwise do so, Mr. Chairman. There's a bit of confusion, I think, in the paperwork. Everything went quite fast. In particular, with respect to the provision that you want to put in, the $750,000 we're asking for is for work for the financial consultant. There will be ridership. There is work being done on the ridership studies, but that is being covered under other accounts. It's not part of this particular account, and I wouldn't like to confuse it with this account. That means the $750,000 we're asking for is for the financial consultants who will be working with us on the funding plan and the business plan, and will incorporate the inputs from the ridership studies.
Okay, Mr. Hoffman?
I think you may have just gotten to my question there. I want to make sure that a ridership study is part and parcel, obviously, of a financial and business plan, which you would think
yes, it is.
Kind of has to be. Okay.
Yes, it is.
Good. Thanks.
Mr. Valdez?
A ridership that's supposed to be concluded by March 1st, 2013. Is that correct?
No, the statement that's in here is not totally incorrect. It comes out of previous discussions that we've had. The ridership studies, as I think in this committee already mentioned in the past too, we have put a ridership peer review group to peer review all the work that's being done on the ridership studies, and the work continues. And there will be ridership inputs into the business plan by October the 14th. However, there was a request by the Select Committee on High-Speed Rail and by others that the ridership study gets continuously, and it's not abnormal, continuously refined as the project gets refined up to a investment grade ridership study. And that is where the 2013 comes from. And the investment grade ridership study you do not need for any of the planning and any of the investment grade is just to help investors to feel more comfortable with the inputs that they receive. In fact, most investors, financial investors in the world, do their own investment grade ridership studies. So it's a thing I would like to discuss with yourselves at a later date. We're not yet busy at the investment grade of ridership studies because generally financial consultants do it for investors themselves, so they do it.
It just seems kind of funny to me that you would ask for one or the investment grade finally come in after we've actually broke ground and started construction. Seems kind of backwards.
Again, investment grade financial ridership studies are done on all projects later on in the game when the financial investors want to come into the picture. The banks want them. They want to have those type of things. It is a continuous refinement of the model. All the data that the builders require and all the data that the builders base their concepts on and their business plans on will be available before that. And will be in the business case that we will be presenting in October.
The staff recommendation is to approve the $750,000 in funds for the financial consulting services and the developing of the as a part of developing the business plan. The staff had suggested that if we were concerned about whether the ridership study within that was insufficient, we might provide additional funds. You seem to indicate that it would be sufficient within the funds that you have.
That's right.
So therefore, the language that is in italics in our staff report, we would not need to consider, apparently. And so the staff recommendation is to approve the $750,000 without any additional language. Is that a motion and a second? The motion is second to provide $750,000 for financial consulting services. Roll call, please.
Mr. Gordon?
Aye.
Ms. Butler? Mr. Huffman? Mr. Valadao?
No. And that motion passes. Moving to item number 3, the issue of governance reform, which was raised particularly in the LAO report and has been much discussed and is the subject of no less than 6 pieces of legislation in the current session. The suggestion here of staff is that pending the some additional decisions around organizational structure that the legislature might make, that that we would reduce the state operations budget by $6.4 million and adopt language that would authorize the Department of Finance to augment the budget pending the Joint Legislative Budget Committee approval and adoption of any legislation to reform the governance of high-speed rail. This would allow for the governance issues and decisions to be reached by the legislature. It would provide funding and allow the Joint Legislative Budget Committee to continue to fund state operations based on any potential changes that might be made in structure. Are there any comments on this from either Finance or LAO?
Mark Monroe, Department of Finance. First of all, we don't support any language that would partially fund the authority's budget. We want pretty sure that could lead to delays in the project on an already tight timeline. And the other, we're not clear what's expected. The administration doesn't have an approved position on any of the bills that are mentioned here, and so it sounds like the administration is being asked to buy off on something that it hasn't really seen. in terms of changing the way that the authority is run.
Any additional comments from LAO or from Mr. Van Ark?
As our report indicates, we do recommend governance reform for the High-Speed Rail Authority. We're not quite sure how that would be accomplished through this action. The legislature has the ability to make reforms. They don't necessarily need to hold up half of the budget in order to get that done. If the recommendation here or the suggestion is to ask the administration to do a reorganization plan and tie half of the funding to the completion of that plan, how they're going to, how they would reorganize the High-Speed Rail Authority, or how they would be able to move it, successfully into Caltrans if that was what was chosen, then tying the funding could make some sense, because it would then require, they would have to do it in order to get the rest of the funding. But if the legislature decides to just pass a bill by the end of this session, or ordering reform, then the funding doesn't necessarily have to be tied to that for that to happen. So
let me ask staff if you. I'm trying to figure out. I think I understand what the attempt is here. The attempt is to say, that we want to have some level of flexibility should there be a decision reached around any change to organizational structure. And given that there are multiple pieces of legislation and a lot of different alternatives being discussed, and no firm decision yet made by the legislature, you want to, I think, leave us with some level of flexibility. And I'm wondering if there, is there another way that we can get there to achieve that flexibility as need be? Is there a way to come back and revisit halfway through the year? Being new here, I'm not sure what would be the best way to get there.
There was considerable discussion about ways to facilitate enacting a governance change this year, and given the fact that the budget timelines are very tight and the policy process is going to take longer to hash out many different options for improving the governance structure of high-speed rail, this was a solution that was basically adopted to allow for the policy process to complete its deliberations and allow enough time for that process to end, and provide funding so that there'd be stability for the state operations, but then also sort of a required report back so that there would be, so that due consideration would be made to legislative efforts to reform the governance process. This was in lieu of other ideas which were really around just giving the authority half the money for the year and then making the other half the money contingent on enactment of a bill appropriating half the money in a separate piece of legislation. So this was seen as a way to try to provide some stability, because there's a lot of uncertainty about when a bill would be enacted to reform the governance process. If by taking this action, essentially, this would signal that the subcommittee felt that governance change was necessary this year and would have to happen as part of the legislative, the rest of the legislative year at some point.
Mr. Huffman?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm certainly of the view that some governance reform is necessary, the High-Speed Rail Authority. That said, I don't necessarily know what each of these bills does. I know that the LAO has put out a very interesting and provocative proposal to create a new division in Caltrans, and I sort of get the thinking behind that, and it does resonate a bit with me, because I watch this authority, this fledgling authority that's relying so heavily on outside consultants to do things that Caltrans already does as part of their core mission, acquiring rights away, doing public outreach, delivering projects. So there's some appeal, at least for me, to explore that option. There may be downsides to it as well. And again, I don't know what our colleagues have suggested in the 6 bills that we have moving through. So I'm a little hesitant to say we are definitely going to lock in a governance makeover through a budget play when we don't know what that makeover is in the current year. I would prefer to look at it on a separate track, if you will, but to look at it very quickly. And as the LAO pointed out, if we settle on a governance reform, there's no having already provided the funding for the state operations doesn't tie our hands to go ahead and make that reform this year. So I think I'd be more comfortable with that route.
Okay, if that's the route that the committee wants to go, then we don't need to take any action relative to this item, because the only action that was being proposed was to provide some limit on the operations budget tied to some budget language, but we wouldn't need to do that.
I'm all for making the statement that we need governance reform. I'm just not. I'm a little bit troubled by this particular tool for making that statement.
Okay. If there's agreement on that, and I also would echo that I'm very interested in governance reform and looking at some alternatives here. So. I think we'll do that in another forum. Make sure that happens. We'll move then to the final issue, which is number 4, Public Information and Communication Services. The May revision has requested some additional funding for public relations, and the staff is suggesting that we reduce the public relations communications budget by roughly a half. They provide some information as to how they kind of have come to that conclusion. Let me ask first if there's comments from the Department of Finance or LAO on this issue.
We would just say that we support the recommendation that we put forth for $2.3 million for Ogilvy and their public outreach. As the environmental process wraps up in the coming year, it's going to be very important that the authority have as many means as possible to facilitate that outreach, and we believe that this only would help that.
Does LAO have any comment on this?
Yes, we'd be supportive of the staff recommendation. We'd just like to point out that one of the items in the analysis is to add 3 state positions for public outreach. And we'd just like to point out that the May revised request for 15 new staff that you approved in the vote-only item included 2 new information officers in there as well. So if you were to adopt this proposal, there would be 5 new public information officers on staff beyond the 2 that you've already approved. So.
Let me just clarify. I think that what the staff has done here is not suggesting that we add those, but that's their analysis of how their rationale, I think, for that reduction. But Mr. Van Ark, any comment? Then I'll take public comment on this item.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I definitely do have to comment on this particular item. Outreach and communication is extremely critical to the success of this high-speed rail project. Quite simply, this project will fail without the ongoing involvement of the public, decision makers and the stakeholders. Without effective communication and outreach, this project will fail because the authority will not be equipped to effectively address the concerns of the public and their stakeholders and the decision makers. You even heard it today again. The legislature itself, every time we sit in these meetings, is requesting for greater outreach, is requesting for more outreach, is requesting for more communication at local and all levels. Initially, our outreach and communication efforts were focused on answering literally hundreds of public press, and local government requests for public-related information that came on a daily basis. We then extended our work to begin coordinating communication efforts with local outreach teams in individual regions throughout the state, 800 miles. This involves huge coordination efforts to allow for broad dissemination of accurate information as required under the state and federal environmental review process. It includes coordinating large number of public, technical, and interactive meetings in the regions, drafting responses to media inquiries regarding the project development, and building a statewide stakeholder database for use throughout the project development. Daily interaction is required between the authorities' teams of engineers, scientists, experts, with cities, with counties, elected officials, business councils, federal agencies, environmental agencies such as the EPA, Fish and Wildlife, the Parks Board, labor councils, suppliers, contractors, international partners, and associations with whom we have exchanged programs and benchmark programs, freight railroads, power utilities, representatives of agricultural communities, regional transportation agencies, many other state and regional agencies, minority and small business representative, trades associations, support and opposition groups, financiers, potential operators, embassies and consulates, the press, and obviously many of the members of the legislature. The authority is committed to ensure public awareness of all the authority's activities, helping guarantee transparency and facilitating the public's interaction with the authority board and staff. Ogilvy has been providing this kind of outreach, working with members of the traditional and non-traditional news outlets, as well as the social media. Ogilvy continues to provide media expertise and outreach, especially when large announcements are made and specific issues arise. And we should not forget also the success of being able to attract $3.9 billion to the state of California. Due to the size, scope, and complexity of this project, the number of stakeholders affected along the whole of the corridor, up and down 800 miles of corridor, this is an enormous task. This budget position of $2.3 million is quite frankly extremely limited for the size of this project, a $45-50 billion project. And when compared with all other agencies that are in any form constructing or involved in development of projects, this is a minor value. I really request you to reconsider and to make this position of $2.3 million available to ourselves so that we can continue our efforts of communications and outreach here on our project.
Let me see if there's any public comment, and then I'll open it up for the committee. On this item?
Stacy Mortensen with the San Joaquin Regional Rail Commission. We would strongly urge you to fully fund the outreach efforts. We hear that constantly at the legislative hearings. We hear it in our own backyard. There's so many people to get to know. It takes so long to percolate that level of information down into the communities. And as you go forward, that effort is going to have to ramp up, not ramp down. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark Smith on behalf of the American Council of Engineering Companies of California. We also support the proposed budget for outreach. I think we've heard some comments and testimony today that outreach is critically important, and urge you to support this funding item. Thank you.
Chairman Gordon, committee members, Mark Kyle, operating engineers, we would urge you to fully to support full funding for communications. In my travels talking with our members in grassroots meetings from Fresno to Eureka, repeatedly there's been a lack of understanding of high-speed rail, the project, its scope, and it's been one of the biggest errors on the front end of this project, and it's been biting us repeatedly, and a lot of the criticisms that are alive today are a result of poor communication on the front end of this project. We can't afford to repeat that mistake. We need to have better outreach and more outreach in order to have successful operations, whether it's suburbanites on the peninsula or farmers in Fresno and Kern County. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Huffman.
I just want to say that, Mr. Van Ark, if you've been in these hearings and you're hearing that we want you to spend more money on PR, I think you've been in different hearings. Because I think what the theme has been out of our hearings has been we want more of an emphasis on business plan, finance plan, accountability. accountability being a very important piece of that. And I think when we look at the outreach that's being done, which you were asking us to double down on, basically the same system, you got to look at, you know, as Dr. Phil might say, how's it going for you? How's that working for you? I don't think it's going so well. And I think when you send highly paid proxies from PR firms to do slick sales jobs out into areas where there's a lot of passion, a lot of opposition, that's not necessarily a recipe for success in your outreach. I have no problem investing in the outreach that has to be part of this project, but I look at what you could do with $2.3 million, and I can only imagine some of the hourly rates that you're paying to folks, you know, who don't really have any direct accountability to anyone other than a contract to make money off of the state. And I think about the market that we're in and the employment situation, probably a lot of really competent, highly qualified people that would like to go to work for the state of California, for the High-Speed Rail Authority, who would actually work for you, so that when you sent them into the Central Valley, they weren't a high-paid proxy for you under a contract. They actually had some direct accountability to the project. And so I definitely support where staff, I think, is trying to go, which is to say you got to make some changes in the way you do this. And I also think, again, the priority needs to be much more on the key planning, foundational threshold planning stuff that we still haven't seen, and less on the slick sales job stuff.
Mr. Valadao?
I'd like to thank Mr. Huffman for his comments and echo that. Going out and talking to the people about funding, ridership, your financial plan, your business plan, your management structure, alignment, I don't know if you really are ready to go out and talk to the public about that, because none of those things are actually really clear as of yet. And then in the LAO report, you see that you've got 604 consultants already, 6.9 million in invoices paid to consultants without properly verifying if the work was actually completed. I don't know if you're quite ready for the amount of money that you're asking for. And especially on the alignment part of it, we're doing another study now around the Tejon area, the I-5 alignment, another $700,000 to study something that's already been studied and pushed aside. I don't know if we're quite ready for this much money, so I'm going to have to vote no on this one.
Ms. Butler.
I want high-speed rail to succeed. I do. But you're in year 4 of a 5-year plan, and we're still having problems with communication. So you're not in year 4?
Of the communications contract?
Yeah, the 2012, the Dix.
No, we've just completing the first year.
Okay.
Yeah. It's the new contract.
So what's the one, the 5-year of the $9 million, the 5-year $9 million?
That's the contract we're talking about, and we're talking about. I believe the chart you're looking at would be showed the 3rd year, which this contract started mid the 9-10 budget year. So this would be roughly, we are roughly right now in month 14 of that contract.
So to echo what my colleague Mr. Huffman was saying, it's probably, you know, more grassroots approach. It sounds like would be helpful. Then, and is that who Ogilvy's employing, or the grassroots on the floor people? Or are they bringing them from all over the country?
That's right, and I apologize if I neglected to introduce myself. Jeff Barker, I'm Deputy Director of the Authority over Outreach and Communications. That's exactly what we ask of this contract and of this activity. It's not bumper stickers and PR per se. This is literally outreach, answering constituent questions, answering many constituent questions that come into legislators' offices here, sitting down with community groups, affected property members, trying to appear at Board of Supervisors and City Council meetings, doing public information meetings. As we sit here today, there's a series of 27 public information meetings happening in Southern California. We completed last week a series of public information meetings through the Central Valley from Bakersfield up to Merced. It's that type of outreach, answering questions, answering the real what's going to happen to my property, what is the sound of the train like, and trying to communicate the complicated decisions that we make up at our board meetings monthly to the constituents down at the local level. It really is a grassroots outreach, information dissemination project that we are trying to work on. And I should say that $2.3 million is dwarfed by the budget spent at similar entities, even local transportation entities in the Bay Area and Southern California. Their budgets for this type of work are quadruple, if not more, of what we are asking for in this budget.
Thanks.
I guess I need to echo some comments that have been made. That I think that the public relations communications has been pretty abysmal on this project to date, and I do worry tremendously about to the extent that this is being driven by a set of consultants who, I would feel differently, I think, about this if it were folks who officially represent the authority rather than the folks who are here as hired guns. And so it troubles me a little bit, and so I just think that you need to kind of do a restart on this at some level. So, what's I think I know where a couple of folks are going. Pleasure of the committee on this item.
Mr. Chair, I would love to have an alternative where we could perhaps provide some additional funding to outreach, but I'm just not inclined to provide a doubling down on a system that's not working. So I will support the staff's approach, and maybe between now and the final budget, we can try to work with the authority to get this turned around.
Okay, we could, this item, I guess, could full budget committee, Christian, could give some further consideration as an alternative?
Yeah, later on the conference process.
In the conference process, possibly. So I think I have a motion to accept the staff recommendation, and I have a
reluctant second.
Do I have a second?
You can do it.
Maybe I don't have a second. I have a second. I'm. My
district would shoot me.
Yeah. No. Okay.
Not enough.
Okay. I would be comfortable. I did. In zeros. I just would like to clarify. I'm comfortable with the motion, Mr. Huffman. If there, I want to be clear that the staff laid out, some possible places where those funding cuts could come from. I would prefer to just simply say we're reducing this and let the authority figure out how to best to do that.
Yeah, and maybe have them bring back to us an alternative plan that relies less on outsourcing to proxies and more on directly accountable personnel that can engage in this outreach.
Okay, and I'd like to see that also.
Yeah.
So, and perhaps that could be worked on in conference too. We have a motion and a second to reduce funding for public relations contract by $1,068,000. And we'll take a roll call on that.
Mr. Gordon.
Aye.
Ms. Butler. Aye. Mr. Huffman. Aye. Mr. Valadao.
No. All right. That concludes File 2665 relative to the California High-Speed Rail Authority. Thank you, Mr. Van Ark and others. We'll move now to File